He entered the courtroom like a ghost in chains. The first 3 seconds were enough to draw every eye thin as a scarecrow. Wrists bound in cold steel, a jacket so frayed it looked more like a ragged flag than clothing. His boots told the deeper story, one torn wide at the toe. Sock soaked from rain, the other stitched with duct tape curling away like peeling bark. To most of the gallery, he was another homeless man who had finally wandered too far, just one more shadow in a city eager to look the other way. Yet the sound of him arriving carried a strange weight. Each clink of chain struck against the marble floors like a muted drumbeat at a funeral procession. The fluorescent lights above bleached his hollow cheeks, deepening the lines until his face seemed carved from stone. This was not merely a defendant. This was a man time had tried to erase. The clerk announced his name without ceremony, Elias Ironhand Navarro, 62 years old. His crime disturbing the peace-seeking shelter beside a diner's dumpster during a thunderstorm so violent it turned streets into rivers. The charge sheet called him a vagrant. The storm had nearly drowned him. The prosecutor adjusted his tie with irritation, snapping his papers into neat stacks. To him, Navarro was routine. To the men and women in pressed suits, he was invisible. Another case number, another inconvenience. But then Judge Rebecca Hale opened the file. Her eyes drifted down the page as they had 1,000 times before until she froze. Her breath hitched. A name leapt off the paper like a spark. Navarro. She had seen it before, half a world away, etched in block letters at the bottom of emails her son had sent from dusty outposts in Afghanistan. Her son's words had carried that name with reverence, almost awe. Her hand trembled on the bench. Could this broken man before her truly be the soldier her son once wrote about, the man who had pulled him back from death's edge? The thought was impossible. And yet it was here, standing in chains, waiting for judgment. Hey soldiers, sound off where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and lock in for the next mission. The name burned in her mind like a flare against night. Elias Navarro. Captain Daniel Hale had written it often, his messages glowing on a laptop under field lanterns in Helmand Province. The words had been heavy with exhaustion, but laced with gratitude every time Navarro appeared. The line followed, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be alive to write this. Now, Rebecca could scarcely reconcile the two images. Across the courtroom sat a figure slumped in defeat, the complete opposite of the stubborn, unyielding sergeant her son had described. Daniel had called Navarro a rock in chaos, the one who carried others through minefields when the world was collapsing. But war and years had stripped him down. His hair had turned to iron gray, his frame bent under invisible weight, his eyes dimmed into something beyond fatigue. Only one thing tied him to Daniel's stories: the scar, a jagged line carved down his forearm, unmistakable even through a tear in his sleeve. Daniel had written of it once in vivid detail, the price Navarro paid dragging him from a burning Humvee after an RKG-3 grenade tore through their convoy. Rebecca's grip on the file tightened until her knuckles whitened. A storm of memory and duty collided inside her chest. She wanted to stand, to declare the truth, to strip away the labels that had been nailed onto this man's life. But in this sterile chamber, she wasn't a mother. She was a judge, and the robes she wore shackled her as firmly as the cuffs biting into Navarro's wrists. The prosecutor's voice droned like static, listing charges of vagrancy and trespassing, painting Elias as a nuisance unworthy of compassion. Each word landed on Rebecca's ears like an insult not only to Navarro, but to the son who had trusted him with his life. Navarro didn't respond. He sat motionless, as though the verdict had already been decided, as though he had learned long ago that his voice carried no weight against a badge and a pressed suit. but when the prosecutor labeled him a repeat offender, Elias shifted ever so slightly. His scarred hand brushed against his sleeve, fingers unconsciously tracing the jagged line of flesh as if to remind himself that it was real, that once his pain had meant something. Rebecca saw it. She alone understood, and in that fleeting gesture, her suspicion hardened into certainty. This was the man, the soldier, the savior her son had once called indestructible. Her pulse hammered in her ears. One question rose above the hum of the courtroom. Heavy as artillery, if the world had forgotten him, what else had been buried with his name? The prosecutor's words dripped with certainty: a repeat offender, a nuisance dragging down property values, a man better off behind bars. The gallery shifted in restless agreement, more eager for the case to end than for justice to be done. Then the courtroom doors banged open. A tall man in a dark suit strode in, his voice cutting like a blade. Jonathan Reed. Attorney at law? I'll be representing Mr. Navarro. The prosecutor sneered. Last-minute representation. Highly irregular. Judge Rebecca Hale didn't hesitate. Accepted. Proceed. Mr. Reed. Reed wasn't just another lawyer. He was a decorated veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division. A man who had leapt into combat zones before stepping into courtrooms, and when his eyes locked on Navarro, he recognized something the others had missed: discipline that couldn't be faked, even in shackles. Navarro sat with the posture of a soldier. The prosecutor pressed on, branding Elias a serial vagrant, a drunk, a threat to paying customers. Reed calmly flipped open the police report and raised his voice. No bottles were found, not one. The state's own evidence contradicts its claim. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor faltered. Reed pushed harder. Why were there no photographs? Why did witness statements fail to match the official report with each question? The cracks widened until the routine case looked less like law and more like negligence. But Reed wasn't finished. During recess, he stopped Judge Hale in the hallway, his gaze unyielding. You know something. Who is he really? Rebecca's silence stretched like a trial of its own, before breaking in a whisper meant for no one else: the man who saved my son's life. Reed's jaw tightened. He didn't look back at Navarro. Then this won't end as just another case file. When court resumed, Reed carried a folder no one expected to see in a municipal trial. Military reports, commendations, Pentagon letterhead stamped across the cover. He set it on the defense table with deliberate weight. The gallery leaned forward. The prosecutor shifted uneasily. Judge Hale gripped her pen, her pulse hammering. Whatever was inside would either vindicate a forgotten soldier or expose how deeply the system had failed him. Jonathan Reed opened the folder as though arming a charge. The first page bore words heavy enough to silence the room: Department of the Army, declassified after action report. He began to read: Sergeant Elias Navarro, U.S. Army, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2011. The prosecutor leapt to object, but Judge Hale's raised hand cut him off. Reed pressed forward, his voice steady, carrying the cadence of someone who had once spoken over gunfire. The report told of a convoy ambushed outside Sangin, one of the deadliest corners of the war. Navarro had manned the M240B on a Humvee when an RKG-3 grenade tore through the lead vehicle. Flames spread, shrapnel ripped flesh. Chaos took hold, but Elias didn't retreat. He laid down suppressive fire until every surviving man cleared the zone, then grabbed his M4A1 and dragged 3 wounded Marines out. He went back again, hauling 2 Afghan allies to safety, ignoring burning fuel and exploding ammunition. Reed's tone sharpened. That decision bought his squad the minutes they needed to live. That decision prevented 7 funerals. The prosecutor squirmed, his arguments evaporating with every word. The gallery leaned forward. Eyes locked, Judge Hale, outwardly composed, felt her throat tighten at the memory of her son's email, the one that said Navarro had carried him from fire. The jagged scar, proof of the truth. Reed closed the folder with finality. Navarro was nominated for the Silver Star and Purple Heart, but the paperwork vanished in transfer, his sacrifice buried by bureaucracy. He turned, voice cutting through the chamber. And now, 15 years later, the same system that failed to honor him would dare call him a criminal for trying to survive a storm. A hush blanketed the courtroom. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Navarro sat unmoving, his scarred hands trembling against the chains. Judge Hale's pen hovered, then stilled. Every word matched Daniel's accounts, every detail aligned with memories she thought only she carried. There was no doubt this man was not just a defendant. He was the soldier her son had once called indestructible. The silence fractured as Reed spoke his last line. This man doesn't belong in chains. He belongs among the heroes our nation remembers. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but no sound came. All eyes turned to Judge Hale. Her hand trembled not from doubt, but from the weight of the decision that would shake the walls of her courtroom. The courtroom rose in unison, not by protocol, but by something older and deeper, respect. For the first time in 15 years, Elias Navarro was no longer a vagrant or a forgotten case number. He stood with a silver star and a purple heart fastened to the torn fabric of his jacket. The weight of those medals lighter than the silence he had carried alone for so long. Judge Rebecca Hale stepped down from the bench. No longer the distant figure of authority, but a mother who owed this man her son's borrowed years. Her voice was steady, though her eyes shimmered. You gave Daniel time he never would have had. You gave me moments I never would have known. That is not failure, Sergeant. That is a gift. Elias bowed his head, his scarred hand closing over the medals as though anchoring himself to something solid. I only did what had to be done, he whispered. The room held its breath, every heart in the gallery beating with the same unspoken realization they were witnessing something greater than a verdict. Greater than the law, something that touched the marrow of duty itself. Then the unexpected happened. The prosecutor, the man who minutes earlier had demanded fines and jail, rose stiffly to his feet. His hand snapped to his brow in a salute. One by one, the gallery followed. Lawyers, clerks, strangers who had never known Elias Navarro, all stood at attention. A man once cast aside by the world was being restored in the only currency that mattered, honor. Outside, the storm had broken. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, laying a golden crown across Navarro's shoulders. He stepped out slowly, no longer the broken veteran who had walked in, but the soldier remembered. Because sometimes the hardest battlefield is not fought with rifles and fire, but with memory, dignity, and the courage to stand for those who once stood for us. And when we choose to remember them, we remind ourselves of a truth unshakable. Honor does not fade. Even when the world forgets,